Rachel Whitmore vanished without a trace on the day she was supposed to attend her mother's funeral. Her sister Melanie never stopped searching, haunted by unanswered questions for 9 long months, until a shocking discovery, hundreds of miles away, turned the case upside down and revealed a truth no one could have imagined. On a cold November morning, the kind that turns your breath to fog and makes the streets look like something out of a black and white film, Rachel Whitmore disappeared. She wasn't running away. At least no one thought she was. She was going to her mother's funeral. Her car was packed with a small overnight bag. A travel mug of coffee sat in the cup holder, and she had even printed directions, something she never did, usually trusting her phone's GPS. But that morning she double-checked everything. She wore a dark coat, sensible shoes, and a scarf her mother had given her 2 Christmases ago. It was the kind of morning where nothing felt particularly unusual, and maybe that's what made it so chilling. She left her small apartment in Portland just after 6:30 a.m. The drive to Hillsborough, where the funeral would be held, should have taken a little under 3 hours. Her sister Melanie received a text at 6:44 a.m. that simply read, "On the road. See you soon." That was the last time anyone heard from Rachel. At 11:20 a.m., Melanie tried calling her. The service at the church had already started, and everyone expected Rachel to arrive at least 30 minutes early. She was always the responsible one, the planner, the careful sister who kept everyone else in line. When her phone went straight to voicemail, Melanie figured maybe she'd just turned it off. Maybe Rachel needed a moment alone before stepping into the emotional storm of their mother's funeral. But by the time the service ended, there was still no sign of her. Family and friends stood outside the church, waiting. Some thought maybe she'd gotten lost or had car trouble. But Rachel never got lost, and her car, a reliable, well-maintained sedan, had never once failed her. Panic didn't set in right away, not until Melanie started calling hospitals. Then she called the police. Then she drove the route herself. It was later that evening when Rachel's car was found, parked neatly at a rest stop along Route 26. It was locked. Inside were her purse, her phone, her ID, and the overnight bag. Everything was in order, except Rachel was gone. The driver's seat was pushed back the way she usually kept it. The coffee cup was still warm, but there were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no footprints leading away from the vehicle. The surveillance camera at the rest stop had stopped working 3 weeks prior due to a maintenance issue that had yet to be fixed. No one had seen anything. News of the disappearance spread fast. It wasn't every day that a woman vanished on the way to her mother's funeral. People were drawn to the strange timing, the emotional weight of it. She hadn't been on a vacation. She hadn't been on a late-night walk. She was supposed to be with her family, grieving, surrounded by people who loved her. Instead, she vanished. On one of the most significant days of her life. Flyers were printed and distributed across Oregon and Washington. Police set up a tip line. Volunteers combed the woods near the rest stop. They found nothing. No scraps of clothing, no blood, no tire tracks out of place. Even the scent dogs came up empty after the trail led just a few feet into the tree line and then stopped cold. It was as if she had been lifted off the face of the earth. Her family cooperated fully with police. They allowed full access to Rachel's apartment, her laptop, her bank records, and her emails. Nothing stood out. She had paid rent in full. She had texted her boss 2 days prior to ask for bereavement leave. Her calendar had reminders for dry cleaning, groceries, and an upcoming dental appointment. There was no note, no suspicious messages, no record of any mental health crises or medications that could suggest a breakdown. She had made plans to return home after the funeral and had even ordered a book online, scheduled for delivery the following week. Detectives hit wall after wall. There were no signs of foul play, no ransom notes, no sightings. Highway Patrol checked traffic cameras but couldn't find her car on any stretch of road past the rest stop. It had been like chasing smoke. The case quickly became one of the most talked about disappearances in the region, drawing in amateur sleuths, internet forums, and YouTube channels devoted to true crime. Everyone had theories, but no one had answers. Some believed she had been kidnapped. Others suggested she had staged the disappearance herself. Some said maybe she had suffered a breakdown and wandered off, confused and disoriented. But why would someone lock their own car, leave their belongings behind, and walk away into a forest with no supplies or means to survive? If she had intended to disappear, why leave behind her phone and money? If she had been abducted, why was there no struggle, no witnesses, and no evidence? As winter approached, hope began to fade. Rachel's family held a second memorial, this time for her. Not a funeral, but something close. People cried. People asked questions no one could answer. Melanie spoke about how Rachel had been the glue that held everyone together, how her last words to her were through a text that didn't hint at anything unusual, how hard it was to accept someone could vanish so completely. In the months that followed, the case went cold. Police kept the file open but no longer had active leads. Volunteers stopped showing up to search. The flyers faded in windows and on telephone poles. Life began to move on, painfully and slowly. Her name stopped trending. News outlets moved on to the next tragedy. But to her family, especially Melanie, the wound remained open. A wound with no explanation, no closure. Rachel Whitmore had left home to bury her mother. Instead, she became the subject of a mystery no one could explain. A woman who disappeared in broad daylight, leaving behind nothing but questions and silence. After the shock of Rachel's disappearance settled into a heavy, constant ache, those closest to her began to piece together what they could about her life before that cold November morning. Rachel Whitmore was known to friends and family as a steady presence, someone who rarely caused waves or drew attention. She worked as a librarian at a small local branch in Portland, a job she had loved for years. She enjoyed the quiet order of bookshelves, the occasional storytime sessions with children, and the calm routine that balanced her otherwise busy life caring for her mother. Her mother's death had come suddenly. A severe stroke had taken her only weeks before the funeral, leaving Rachel responsible for funeral arrangements and handling paperwork for the first time. Those close to Rachel said she had been devastated, yet quietly composed, determined to do right by her mother and her family. There had been no warning signs that she planned to disappear, or that she was struggling beyond the normal grief one might expect. The police investigation delved into Rachel's daily life to see if anything had shifted in the weeks leading to her vanishing. They scoured her laptop, her phone records, and her social media accounts for clues. One of the few strange details was her recent activity on some obscure internet forums. These weren't the usual sites people visited for entertainment or news. Instead, they focused on topics like disappearing voluntarily, starting a new life, and cases of amnesia. Rachel's browser history showed she had spent hours reading stories of people who had walked away from their old lives and assumed new identities. She had bookmarked several articles about identity theft and methods to erase digital footprints. Her family found this discovery puzzling. No one ever suspected Rachel was unhappy enough to consider disappearing. She was close to her sister Melanie and a handful of longtime friends. There had been no argument, no falling out, no hidden debts or threats. Yet the internet history suggested something deeper was stirring beneath the surface, perhaps a secret dissatisfaction or a fear she kept hidden. The police also examined Rachel's financial records with great care. Her bank statements showed no unusual withdrawals or transfers. Her credit cards had not been used since the day she disappeared. There were no trips booked, no hotel stays, no online shopping sprees. The only anomaly was a small cash withdrawal from an ATM near her apartment on the morning of her disappearance. But the amount was modest, just enough to cover gas and maybe a meal. It was as if Rachel had prepared for a short journey, but nothing more. Her apartment gave no indication of a planned escape. Everything was as she had left it, clean and orderly, with a few unopened letters on the kitchen counter. Her clothes were neatly folded in her closet. Her suitcase, which she had packed for the funeral, sat by the door. There was no sign of hurried packing or frantic searching. No note, no letter, no explanation. It was as though Rachel had simply stepped outside and vanished into thin air. Friends remembered that Rachel had been a private person. She didn't share much about her dreams or disappointments. She rarely posted on social media, preferring face-to-face conversations over digital ones. Those who knew her said she had always been somewhat reserved, yet kind and dependable. She volunteered at the local animal shelter and loved hiking in the nearby mountains, often taking weekend trips to clear her mind. The police interviewed neighbors and co-workers, but no one recalled seeing or hearing anything unusual in the days before her disappearance. She had seemed normal, maybe a little tired from the stress of losing her mother, but otherwise nothing that would have raised alarm bells. The only person who hinted at any tension was Melanie, who admitted that Rachel had been under immense pressure. She had spent months caring for their mother, balancing work and appointments, and managing family disputes over inheritance and funeral plans. The stress had taken a toll. Melanie suspected Rachel felt trapped, burdened by expectations she hadn't signed up for. But even this didn't explain why Rachel would leave everything behind without a word. The investigation extended to Rachel's mental health history. Police checked with doctors and therapists, but no records suggested any diagnosis or treatment. Her family confirmed that Rachel had never sought professional help for depression or anxiety. There were no prescriptions for medication. It was as if her disappearance had come from nowhere. Detectives also looked into Rachel's personal relationships. She wasn't involved in any romantic relationship at the time, nor was she connected to anyone with a violent past or history of criminal activity. She had a small circle of friends and was generally well-liked and respected. There was no evidence of stalking, harassment, or threats. In the absence of concrete evidence, theories began to circulate. Some speculated that Rachel had suffered a sudden medical emergency, like a stroke or seizure, and wandered off in confusion. Others wondered if she had been kidnapped by someone unknown to her family. Some even proposed the unthinkable, that she had staged her own disappearance to escape a life she found unbearable. The police pursued each theory carefully. They searched hospitals and clinics in case Rachel had been admitted under a different name. They checked for any unidentified patients or people matching her description. Nothing turned up. They interviewed people who reported sightings of a woman resembling Rachel, but none were confirmed. Months passed with no breakthrough. The IE community that had rallied to find Rachel grew quiet, and the initial media frenzy faded. But her family never stopped searching. They held vigils, updated missing person posters, and posted messages on social media hoping for any clue or sign. Behind the scenes, the police kept digging. They reviewed the internet forums Rachel had visited, trying to connect her online activity to real-world actions. They examined her phone records to track movements, but after the rest stop where her car was found, all signals ceased. It was as if she had intentionally severed ties with the digital world. The mystery deepened because Rachel had been so meticulous. She was the type of person who planned ahead, who thought through consequences. If she wanted to disappear, she had done so in a way that left no obvious trace. If she was in danger, the lack of struggle or evidence was baffling. Her disappearance became one of those rare cases that haunted detectives for years. It was not just about a missing person anymore. It was about understanding a woman's hidden story, the reasons behind a choice so extreme and so final. Rachel Whitmore's life before her disappearance was a puzzle piece missing its edges, and no one knew what the picture really looked like until the day she was found again, months later, in a place no one would have expected. Until then, her story remained shrouded in unanswered questions and silent shadows. 9 months after Rachel Whitmore disappeared, the case had gone cold. The police had exhausted every lead they could find. The media attention had faded, and the family's hope was hanging by the thinnest of threads. Melanie, Rachel's sister, had moved out of the family home to try and heal, but the emptiness left by Rachel's absence filled every corner of her life. Friends and neighbors spoke of Rachel in the past tense, as if to convince themselves she was truly gone. Then, out of nowhere, a break appeared in a city hundreds of miles away, in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It began with a routine traffic stop on a quiet road near the outskirts of the city. A woman driving a rented sedan caught the attention of a patrol officer for a minor traffic violation, a broken taillight. The officer asked for her license and registration. The woman handed over an Arizona driver's license in the name Anna Rivers. Something about her demeanor was off. She seemed unusually nervous, her hands trembling as she fumbled through her purse. The officer called dispatch to verify her license. The dispatcher ran the number and found no record of anyone named Anna Rivers with that license number. It didn't exist. The officer asked more questions, but the woman remained tight-lipped. She claimed to have moved recently and said little else. The officer, suspicious now, decided to take her into custody for further questioning. That was when the fingerprint check came back, revealing a shock that rippled through law enforcement agencies and later across the nation. Anna Rivers was Rachel Whitmore. The discovery sent waves of disbelief through both cities. Portland's police department reopened the missing person case immediately. Rachel's family was contacted with the news no one expected. They had been searching for her for 9 long months, believing she was lost forever. Now, she was alive and right in the middle of a new life. Police officers went to Santa Fe to find her apartment and meet the woman they now knew was Rachel. They found her living quietly in a modest studio on the edge of town, keeping a low profile. Her neighbors barely noticed her coming or going. She worked at a small independent bookstore, earning just enough to get by. She was healthy, well-fed, and clean. There was no sign she had been abused or held captive. She did not appear disoriented or confused. Instead, she seemed guarded, unwilling to share much about her time away. For weeks, investigators pressed for answers. They wanted to know what happened in the months after she disappeared. Why did she leave? How had she managed to stay hidden? Rachel declined to answer most questions, offering only vague replies that left police frustrated and family members heartbroken. She refused to explain why she chose the name Anna Rivers. Police dug into public records and discovered that the identity belonged to a girl who had died as a child decades earlier, someone with no digital footprint as an adult, making it an ideal identity to steal and disappear under. This was no random act. Rachel had planned her disappearance carefully. The police investigation expanded to include Rachel's new life in Santa Fe. They found evidence that she had created a detailed plan for starting over. Her apartment held notebooks filled with lists and notes on how to build a new identity, avoid detection, and live under the radar. There were pages dedicated to forging documents, erasing digital footprints, and blending into a new community. She had studied stories of others who vanished, learning from their mistakes. She even noted what kinds of jobs would attract the least attention, like working in a bookstore, where customers came and went without questions. Her new phone was a prepaid burner, purchased with cash, and never registered in her name. Rachel's journey to New Mexico had not been direct. Police tracked bus tickets and shelter stays along a route crossing 3 states. She had traveled mostly by bus and foot, carrying only essentials in a worn backpack. Each leg of her trip was carefully planned to avoid security cameras and avoid people who might recognize her. Her carefulness extended to her appearance. Upon arrival in Santa Fe, she had dyed her hair a different color, grown it longer, and adopted a new style of dress. She wore glasses with thick frames and had learned to change her posture and mannerisms to avoid drawing attention. The discovery left investigators and her family grappling with the reality that Rachel had been alive and functioning all along, but had chosen to cut herself off completely. No calls home, no messages, no hints or signs that she was out there. The fact that she had avoided contact caused deep pain for those who loved her. Melanie, in particular, struggled to reconcile the woman she found with the sister she had lost. Rachel's silence was a wall between them, one that left many questions unanswered. The police focused on understanding the psychological reasons behind her disappearance. A team of psychologists evaluated Rachel over several sessions. They concluded that she had been under extreme emotional strain before she vanished, overwhelmed by grief and a sense of entrapment in her old life. The evaluation suggested she had planned the disappearance as a way to escape the crushing weight of her responsibilities, especially the months spent caring for her sick mother. It was not a sudden decision, but something she had considered and prepared for over a long time. Rachel's silence about the months she spent away was one of the most puzzling aspects. She showed no signs of trauma or distress that might have explained amnesia or coercion. Instead, she was calm, sometimes distant, as though she had already emotionally disconnected from her past life. Her new identity, Anna Rivers, was not just a disguise. It was a new reality she had created to shield herself from memories and relationships that felt unbearable. The police searched for any accomplices but found none. No one had helped her in her disappearance or her new life. Rachel had done it alone, with a level of planning and determination that amazed even experienced investigators. The case became a study in the lengths one person might go to escape pain, grief, and expectation. Rachel Whitmore had vanished on the day she was supposed to honor her mother's memory, only to be found months later living a life so carefully hidden it seemed like a ghost story. Her reappearance was a mix of relief and heartbreak. Proof she was alive, but proof too of the deep wounds that drove her to disappear without a word. No one expected what would come next, uncovering the full story behind her new identity and the secret life she had built far from home. After Rachel Whitmore's startling reappearance in Santa Fe, the investigation turned toward uncovering the truth behind her 9-month absence and the reasons for her disappearance. But Rachel's guarded silence made this task nearly impossible. Though she was physically unharmed, the emotional and psychological barriers she put up were strong. She gave little more than the barest hints, and her family and the police were left piecing together fragments of a story from indirect evidence, small discoveries, and the shadows of her past. One of the first breakthroughs came when detectives found an old journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in Rachel's modest apartment. The journal was written in careful handwriting, filled with dates, thoughts, and reflections from the months before she vanished. It revealed a side of Rachel no one had seen before, her inner turmoil, her fears, and her growing sense of suffocation. The journal painted a picture of a woman overwhelmed not only by grief over her mother's death, but also by an unbearable feeling of being trapped by expectations from her family and society. Rachel wrote about sleepless nights spent wrestling with thoughts she couldn't share with anyone. She described a growing anxiety that seemed to tighten around her chest like a noose. She feared losing herself completely and felt desperate to find a way out. These entries helped explain why she had searched for information on disappearing and starting over under new identities. It wasn't a whim or a moment of madness. It was a deeply thought-out plan born from months of pain. Alongside the journal, police uncovered correspondence Rachel had hidden in a locked drawer. Letters from an unknown sender offered support and guidance, encouraging her to find peace on your own terms and warning her to be careful who you trust. The handwriting was unfamiliar and the content cryptic, hinting at someone who might have been involved in her decision to vanish. However, attempts to trace the letter's origin led nowhere. The envelopes had no postmarks or return addresses, suggesting the sender took great care to remain anonymous. This mysterious correspondence fueled new theories. Had Rachel been influenced or manipulated? Was there someone behind her disappearance? Yet, despite this, there was no evidence of coercion or threat in her behavior or circumstances. It seemed more like she had found a confidant who understood her pain, someone who may have provided the encouragement she needed to follow through on her plan. Detectives also uncovered that in the months before her disappearance, Rachel had quietly liquidated some personal assets. Small amounts of money had been withdrawn from her savings account and converted into cash. This suggested she had been preparing financially for her escape long before she left. It wasn't a reckless, spur-of-the-moment decision, but a carefully orchestrated departure. Investigators next focused on Rachel's movements during her 9 months away. Though she refused to discuss this period, digital footprints told part of the story. Authorities pieced together bus ticket stubs, shelter registrations, and public library computer logs across several states, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. She had traveled mostly alone, staying off the grid whenever possible. Her stops included homeless shelters, public parks, and inexpensive motels. She appeared to avoid technology and contact with others, even though she occasionally used public computers to research how to maintain a new identity. This transient lifestyle explained why she was difficult to find. It was a deliberate effort to remain invisible. Psychologists reviewing her case suggested that Rachel's time away was not just a physical escape, but a psychological journey. She had needed to shed her old identity to survive. The trauma of her mother's death and the pressures that followed had driven her into a survival mode where self-preservation required erasing her former self. This self-imposed exile had come at a high cost. Rachel's refusal to contact her family had fractured relationships deeply. Melanie, in particular, expressed feelings of abandonment and betrayal, struggling to reconcile the sister she loved with the woman who vanished without explanation. Rachel's silence had become a source of pain as powerful as her disappearance itself. Despite the distance, Rachel's family never stopped hoping for her return. They sought counseling and support groups for families of missing persons, trying to understand the psychological impact of such disappearances. Melanie spoke publicly about the emotional toll, hoping to raise awareness about mental health and the complexities behind people who choose to vanish. While Rachel was physically safe, the question remained: what made her come back? The answer came when detectives discovered a phone left behind at her apartment, an old burner phone with a single saved contact. That contact was a name unfamiliar to her family but recognizable to investigators: Dr. Lena Morales, a clinical psychologist, specializing in trauma and grief. Rachel had eventually sought professional help, though discreetly and under her assumed identity. Records showed she had attended therapy sessions over several months in Santa Fe. Dr. Morales's notes, though confidential, were shared with permission after Rachel's consent. They revealed a gradual process of healing and the beginning of acceptance. Rachel's sessions focused on her grief over her mother's death, her feelings of guilt and responsibility, and the overwhelming pressure she had felt before disappearing. The therapy helped her understand that running away hadn't solved her pain. It had only delayed facing it. Slowly, Rachel began to rebuild a sense of self that could integrate both her past and present. It was this therapy that likely played a role in Rachel's decision to come forward and accept help from law enforcement and family. She wasn't ready before, but now she was beginning to reclaim her life. As Rachel started reconnecting with her family, the police worked to close the case. They respected her wishes for privacy, but continued to investigate the unknown correspondent and other loose ends. The letters remained a mystery, but Rachel's safe return was a victory after months of anguish. Her story became a powerful example of how grief and mental health struggles can lead to desperate choices. It highlighted the importance of support, understanding, and the complexity behind why some people choose to disappear. Rachel's journey was far from over, but after 9 months lost to silence and shadows, she had finally begun to step back into the light. Her family faced the difficult road of rebuilding trust, while Rachel confronted the challenge of healing from wounds both visible and hidden. In the end, her disappearance was not just a mystery solved by finding her alive. It was a story about survival, resilience, and the human spirit's capacity to endure even the darkest times. Rachel's return sparked intense public interest and renewed media coverage, but it also opened a new chapter filled with challenges that few had anticipated. Though she had been found alive, The path forward was complicated by fractured relationships, lingering questions, and the difficulty of reclaiming a life she had abandoned so completely. The story of Rachel Whitmore did not end with her being found. It had only just begun. The first obstacle Rachel faced was the emotional distance she had created between herself and her family. 9 months of silence had left deep wounds, especially for her sister Melanie. The years ahead would require patience, understanding, and countless efforts to rebuild trust. Rachel's family wanted answers, but she was not ready to share everything. The silence that had defined her disappearance now shaped their tentative reunions. Rachel struggled with guilt and shame. She understood the pain her disappearance caused, but she also knew she had needed to protect herself from a life that had become unbearable. Her absence was not a rejection of her family, but a desperate attempt to find relief from grief and pressure. Therapy sessions continued, focusing on helping her reconcile her past and present, and on managing the emotional weight of her decisions. The legal process presented another hurdle. When Rachel vanished, she had abandoned her identity legally and practically. Now, restoring her official status was complicated. She had no recent address, no consistent employment history, and her new identity had been built on falsified documents. Police had to carefully untangle the legal implications of her disappearance and her assumed identity as Anna Rivers. There were questions about potential identity theft, even though the name she borrowed belonged to a deceased person, and about how to handle her re-entry into official records. Authorities worked with social services and legal advisors to ensure Rachel's transition back into society was smooth and supported, while respecting her privacy. Rachel's case prompted discussions about the legal rights of missing persons who choose to start over, and how the system could better support those struggling with mental health issues to prevent disappearances before they happen. At the same time, Rachel's story raised awareness about the hidden struggles many face when dealing with grief and mental health. Experts spoke publicly about how loss can trigger overwhelming emotions and, in some cases, a desire to escape. Mental health advocates called for better resources and outreach, especially for those caring for ill family members who might feel trapped by their responsibilities. Rachel's disappearance and return also brought attention to the need for more compassionate responses from families and communities. While some expressed frustration and anger toward her for leaving, many others shared empathy and understanding. Her story became a catalyst for conversations about how society views grief, mental illness, and personal agency. Despite these challenges, Rachel began to find moments of peace and normalcy. She slowly reconnected with her sister and a few close friends, who offered quiet support without pressing for explanations. She returned to Portland, to the life she had left behind, though everything felt different now. The places that once felt familiar were tinged with the memory of her absence. Rachel also returned to work, not at the library, but in a community outreach program focused on mental health awareness. She found purpose in helping others who struggled with grief and loneliness. Her experience gave her a unique voice and perspective, allowing her to connect deeply with those facing similar hardships. The bookstore in Santa Fe, where she had hidden, as Anna Rivers remained a poignant memory, a symbol of the life she created and the strength it took to survive on her own terms. She kept in touch with some of the people she met there, though cautiously, knowing that rebuilding connections required time. Over time, Rachel shared parts of her story in public forums and support groups, always careful to protect her privacy. but hoping to help others understand the complex reasons behind her disappearance. Her honesty and courage inspired many and shed light on a phenomenon few understood. As months turned into years, Rachel and her family worked to heal the fractures caused by her disappearance. Forgiveness was a slow process, but love and patience held them together. They learned to accept the past while focusing on the future. Rachel's story remained a powerful reminder that sometimes the darkest journeys lead to the most profound growth. Her choice to disappear was not about giving up. It was about survival. And her eventual return showed that even after vanishing into the unknown, it is possible to come back, rebuild, and find hope again. The mystery of why Rachel Whitmore disappeared on the way to her mother's funeral was never fully explained, but it no longer needed to be. What mattered most was that she was found alive, that she had survived, and that she was beginning to live again. The story of Rachel Whitmore was one of loss and love, despair and hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.